Welcome! In this series of videos, we will look at software add-ons or utilities for both the PowerBASIC console and Windows compilers. Today we will look again at Splinterwares System Scheduler, specifically for its ability to monitor services. Splinterware System Scheduler comes in two different versions. It comes in a free version, which is limited functionality but is still very useful, and a professional version which currently costs $30 per license. This license cost is a one-off perpetual license. It is not an annual subscription. What we're going to look at today is the professional version to look at its additional capabilities, specifically the ability to monitor a service. But before we get into that, we'll have to create a service to monitor. I want to be able to create a service, start and stop a service at will. So I don't want to take down any of the normal Windows services. So we're going to use an application we wrote some time ago, which will create a PowerBASIC Windows service. And this is our application here. The source code, of course, will be available to download from the GSF website and also GitHub. What this application is going to do is it's going to create a service called AA Monitor Folder Service. It will allow us to install this service, and then we can go into the Task Manager and start the service from the Services tab. This is the folder that contains our compiled CC Service Folder Monitor exe, which is in fact the binary for our service. This application can be installed one of two ways. You can install it using a Windows command prompt, or you can install it from inside PowerShell. What we're going to do today is use PowerShell. In order to install this service, we'll need to run PowerShell as administrator. So first of all, open up the folder which contains the binary which is our service. Then we'll click in the blank area underneath, and then hold down the alternate and press the F key. This brings up a little window which allows us to open PowerShell, either as an administrator or as our current user. So we'll open it as administrator. In order to install this PowerBASIC Windows service, we'll need to run this CC Service Folder Monitor executable. So in PowerShell, all we need to do is press the period key, / key, and then the name of our executable. This executable takes a parameter. It will either be install or uninstall. Since we're attempting to install this service, we'll use the install parameter. And then press the enter key. And that is our service installed, AA Monitor Folder Service. We can now view this service in Task Manager by going down to the taskbar, right-clicking and selecting Task Manager. We can see on the list of services the AAA Monitor Folder Service is currently installed but stopped. If we right-click, we can quite simply start the service. So our service is now running. Now that we've got that far, we now want to go into the System Scheduler and set up a monitoring process. System Scheduler can be found down in the System tray. And here we are. Now we have a number of different event types we can actually set up. We're interested here in setting up a Service Watcher. So we can set up a new event. We can give it a title, and we can put in the service name to watch. We can browse for the service names and just pick it from the list. The next choice you have is your criteria. We're specifically wanting to know when the service is not running. As in this case, we want the service running all the time. And the next thing we want to do is what we want to do in the way of an action. Do we want to start the service, stop the service, or run some other event? In Windows services, you can set them up if they fail to restart. In this case, we want an external monitoring facility to monitor a particular service to see when it stops. So in this case, we're going to select Run Other Event. Now we haven't created another event to run, so we'll save this as it stands and we'll come back to this in a moment. So we will just disable the event so that it doesn't run. So let's go into PowerBASIC and create an event which is going to notify us that something has indeed occurred. So I've created a very small program called test event. This console application will open a console window. It will then send this piece of text out to a file on the root of our path called status.txt. It will append to that file each time it is triggered. It will then wait for 2 seconds and then the application will terminate. So if we compile that, and that's the event we want to set up in System Scheduler. So we pop back in there, right click, pick Edit, and we can now go in and set up our new event. So this is going to be an application. So we click New Event, and we can now enter the details of this event. We can browse to the application. There's our test event exe. We can put the working directory in. This particular application needs no parameters. However, there is a box to allow you to put parameters in, should they be required. We can also set the state to be normal, minimized, maximized, or hidden. We'll just leave it as normal for the moment, as we want to see it coming up. We don't need to schedule this particular event because the event is going to be triggered by the Service Watcher. The Advanced tab we'll come back to. So let's save this and go back to our Service Watcher. We can edit that, and we can now pick the event from the list. There is our application, log the failure of the service. Now that we've set that, we need to set the schedule. How often do we want this monitoring process to run? Normally, if you're monitoring a system, you won't want to check it too often. But for the purposes of this demonstration, we're going to run it every minute. So it will default to running every 1 minute. You can increase this value, say for example, to every 10 minutes. And it gives you other options. You can set it to start at some point in the future, at a particular time and a particular day. However, we'll leave this at 1 minute intervals for the moment. If we save that now, and if we enable the event, we can look at the log of the event when something actually triggers. As we saw earlier, our service is currently running. Therefore, our monitoring service should not trigger, because we're specifically looking for the criteria of the service is not running. So we can see our monitoring system has kicked in. It last ran at 14:15. We can right-click and view the event log file. This tells us that the event has started, but the service is already running, so there is no action required. So our monitor appears to be running quite happily. So let's test it out. Let's go back to Task Manager and stop the service running. That's our service stopped. So we now have to wait for 60 seconds for the next run of our monitor. What should happen is our monitor should trigger, check the service, realize it's not running, and should run our event, as it has indeed done. So our console window has appeared on screen, so the monitor should now have checked the service. If we right-click on the event log file, we can see it's telling us the service is not running, and it is now running the appropriate action. If we look in the folder, we can see there is now a status.txt, and this is telling us that the service has indeed stopped and the time it stopped at. So we have successfully used Splinterware System Scheduler to monitor a service of our choice. This monitor can be set to run at predetermined intervals and check to see whether the service is or is not running. And depending on the criteria which you have selected, you can either report that a service has started or a service has stopped. So let's delve a little deeper into the other options for this process. We haven't yet looked at the Advanced tab. The Advanced tab has a number of tabs. We're looking at the Run As tab. This sets the user to be used to actually run the monitor. We can change this to always use the service local system account. This is non-interactive. You can use this when you want no feedback to the user. You want this to run quite silently. If we save that, if we have a look at the log file, we'll see at the moment the service is running as a specific user. Now that we've changed the service to run as the system account, we get system SVC in brackets. This tells us it's a non-interactive local system account that's actually being used. And you will notice that when it's triggered there, it did not display our console on the screen. Because it's running in a non-interactive mode, it will not display any console or other windows to the user. So it can run quite silently and not interrupt somebody's work on the computer. So what else can System Scheduler do in this Advanced tab? We have a Notifications tab. This can actually be set up to send an email notification, for which you have to define an SMTP server. Having defined that, you can actually put in an email address. And you can trigger emails when the event starts to run, when the event criteria is matched, when the event criteria is not matched, or when the event error or failure is detected. You can even include the last few lines of the event log file in the email. We can go further and set date-time restrictions on when the running of application events is going to happen. We can set holidays, non-working days, and to run within date and time ranges. For the event processing, if an event is missed, for example when the computer or server is powered off, we can decide to do nothing, to run it on startup, or after a prompt on the login. And if the events are scheduled to run once only, we can delete the completed event if it's not scheduled to run again. So we've monitored a service when the service is operational and running. We've monitored a service when the service is stopped. What happens if we deinstall the service? Let's go back to our PowerShell and deinstall this service completely. There is our monitoring folder service now uninstalled from the computer. So what will happen when the monitor is next run? And there is our monitoring service actually triggered. You'll see there's an exclamation mark beside the event type. And if we look down in the bottom window, it tells us that this service does no longer exist. We can right click and look at the event log file. And if we scroll down to the bottom, we'll see it's reporting that the service does not exist anymore. So in summary, what we've done today is we've installed a PowerBASIC Windows service using PowerShell on our local computer. We've started this service, and in System Scheduler Professional, we've created a service watcher to monitor our service. And should that service stop running, it will trigger an additional process of our choice. It will also maintain its own log file for when the service was running, or when the service was not running, or when the service no longer existed on the computer. While you can create some of this functionality within your own PowerBASIC applications, using an external process like this is very quick and easy. Hopefully you'll find all this useful in your day-to-day applications, but that's it for today. Thank you for watching.